Welcome, I'm Rose Aguilar, and this is Your Call. Today, we continue our new series, The Authoritarian Playbook, with historian Kevin Kruse, co-author of Myth America, Historians Take on the Biggest Legends and Lies About Our Past. Today, we'll discuss this political moment, Trump's threats to send the National Guard to more cities, the recent National Conservatism Conference, and the Trump administration's efforts to rewrite, whitewash, and erase history. The, quote, review of the Smithsonian museums is getting a lot of attention, but there's so much more going on. They're targeting public monuments, national parks, and educational institutions through executive orders, political pressure, and canceling or completely defunding programs. In Myth America, co-editors Kevin Kruse and Julian Zelizer write, "We live in the age of disinformation. To be sure, there have always been lies in our public discourse, but in the last few years, the floodgates have opened wide, and the line between fact and fiction has become increasingly blurred, if not completely erased. Unlike past eras in which myths and misunderstandings have clouded our national debate, the current crisis stands apart both for the degree of disinformation and for the deliberateness with which it has been spread." And they wrote this before the 2024 presidential election. Kevin Kruse is professor of history at Princeton University. He's a historian of 20th-century American political and social history, co-editor of Myth America, Historians Take on the Biggest Legends and Lies About Our Past, and contributor to the 1619 Project. Hi, Kevin. Thanks so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's great to have you. We decided to start the Authoritarian Playbook because we felt that many major media outlets were not doing a good enough job of connecting the dots and providing historical context. How do you think legacy media outlets are covering Trump's second term so far?
I think it's a mixed bag. We've seen the New York Times and the Washington Post just, I think, completely capitulate to Trump. And yet, from some surprising corners, the Wall Street Journal is suddenly engaged in a level of critical journalism of a Republican I never thought I would see. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. I think on the whole, though, I think there's really been a general failure on the part of legacy media outlets. And they've been bound, I think, by both a fear of taking on Trump, but also by their own sense of objectivity, where they are willing to give people the benefit of the doubt, and the president seems to lie quite a lot, and they have an inability to challenge that.
What's going on at the Journal? What stands out for you?
It's just the Epstein stuff this week. It's kind of amazing that they have been pushing this case that the president so clearly wants to crack down on. And they've yet been pursuing it, and have just this week released those horrifying images from the that Epstein 50th birthday book, where the drawing allegedly by the president is in, and a lot more. It's kind of a powerful case of investigative journalism that I think stands out all the more so because we're not seeing a lot of that from places where we would normally expect it, like the Times and the Post.
You're reminding me, we did a show a couple of months ago about the administration's escalating war on the media, and it's so easy to forget these things because so much is happening so fast. But at that time, the White House prohibited a Wall Street Journal reporter from boarding Air Force One to cover Trump's trip to Scotland after the paper published that article on July 17th called Jeffrey Epstein's Friends Sent Him Bawdy Letters for His 50th Birthday, and one was from Trump. Trump filed a $10 billion defamation suit against News Corp and Chair Emeritus and longtime Trump ally Rupert Murdoch. News Corp owns the Wall Street Journal.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just, right. But it's easy, Kevin, to forget all of this because so much is happening so fast.
It's just a fire hose every day. I joked on Monday, what a month this has been today. The news is coming fast and furious, and it's difficult for all of us to keep track.
I also wonder what your thoughts are about where we are right now. Something that has struck me with the guests that we've had on the Authoritarian Playbook, I think almost all of them said that they did not think so much would happen so quickly. Has this surprised you?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I really thought that I thought we would see the kind of resistance, and I mean that in a lowercase, non-hashtag way, the kind of resistance that we saw in the first Trump administration, where there was uh, uh, significant amount of press pushback, where the courts were still holding the line, where institutions were willing to stand up to him, where there were even some members of the Republican Party who weren't wholly on board, John McCain, folks like that, who stuck out to him. What we've seen here now is Trump is in complete control of his own party, complete control of the conservative movement. You only have to see the way in which the kind of from Fox News to MAGA people online have completely switched their take on the Epstein files now that they are taking their cues from Trump. And even institutions that I thought would have stood up to him. I would not have expected the New York Times and Harvard and Columbia to buckle as quickly and significantly as they did.
Why do you think that's happening? What are you hearing from your colleagues?
I think a lot of it's fear.
Hmm.
I think a lot of it is intimidation. I think a lot of it, frankly, is cowardice. There's a refusal to stand up to an authoritarian. As Tim Snyder, the Yale historian, has said, the number one rule in resisting authoritarian takeovers is do not comply in advance. But I think complying in general is another thing. I think you've got to make them fight for this every step of the way. I think we just saw something today when the Trump administration apparently announced that they weren't going to go into Chicago after all. They weren't going to send a National Guard in there because they weren't wanted. Well, that's a kind of a face-saving way to put it, but they were scared of the resistance. I think Governor Pritzker and the mayor of Chicago and other institutions there really showed that they were going to fight back on this. That they weren't going to roll over the way in which the mayor in D.C. has, the way in which other political leaders have abdicated their role here. But they were going to stand up to him, and they don't want the fight, right? I mean, I think they're both power hungry, but a little bit lazy. And so I think once people make it clear that this is not going to be something they can simply snap their fingers and be handed, that they're going to look for other people who will roll over and comply.
You're a historian. You and Julian Zelizer edited this book, Myth America, and it's a compilation of about 20 essays from different historians across the country who write about everything from voter fraud to police violence to the insurrection. You wrote a piece in here, The Southern Strategy. There's the New Deal, Confederate monuments. What kind of historical context do we need at this moment to understand what's happening here? How are you thinking about all of this?
Yeah, I mean, this was motivated by the Trump administration, the first Trump administration's kind of outright assault on truth, on basic facts, which really represented something new. People have always disagreed over American history, have disagreed about the facts of our past, but they've disagreed on interpretations, not just what was flatly true and what was flatly wrong. And now we've got people challenging, facts aren't facts. So we were motivated by that because history is, and I'm biased here, it's my job, but I do think history is important for how we understand the present, right? We speak with a shorthand in our political communication where we constantly invoke events of 20th century history. Is this another Munich? Is this another Watergate? Is the Green New Deal a callback to the old New Deal? COVID-19, was this like the Spanish flu epidemic of 1919? On and on. They're constant comparisons to the past. So understanding that past accurately is really important because if we're using the past as a guide to the present and the future, we've got to make sure that we understand where we've been before we can really get a sense of where we're going to go.
Right. And so that's why it is so important to pay attention to and talk about these efforts to whitewash, rewrite, and completely erase history. And there's so much going on. Quote reviews of the Smithsonian are getting a lot of attention, but there's so much more than that. When it comes to this administration rewriting, whitewashing, and erasing history, and we're really going to see this on display next year for the 250th
Yeah.
birthday, where do you think we need to be focusing right now? What concerns you the most about rewriting history?
Well, I mean, at a basic level, I think this administration just doesn't understand what history is. The Trump administration's complaint about the Smithsonian was that they didn't say enough good things about America. That's not what history is. History is not cheerleading. History is all of the facts, good and bad, whether you like it or not. If it's a part of this country's history, it happened, right? And it's part of their history. So, what Trump believes in, what Trump wants to see isn't history, it's propaganda, right? And that's a vision of the country in which you celebrate only the good things and never talk about the bad things. You only talk about the accomplishments and never the failures. You only talk about the heroes and never the villains. You talk about what they did right, never what they did wrong, right? Well, that is, again, propaganda, a one sided history that only lives up to the values. But it's also not just not history, it misses the whole point of history, right? As I tell my students, in American history, when we talk about the bad things that happened in American history, it's not because we want to say bad things about America. It's because we're trying to understand what Americans did when things went bad. What lessons can we learn from them? How do they succeed in solving problems that we face again? And that's something I think that's important to remember about history is you may have thought of it as just memorizing facts and numbers and figures and names, but it really is about thinking about how humanity has dealt with perennial problems, right? War and poverty, war and peace, poverty and financial doom, revolution and repression, thoughts and explorations of issues of equality, justice, freedom, right? These are things that we deal with in our own time, but they're things that Americans and people throughout history have dealt with forever. And so we do ourselves a disservice if we don't understand what has been tried before, what has failed before, what has succeeded before, right? Mark Twain said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes, right? And so we've got to be aware of what we can do to draw on the lessons, the hard won lessons of the past.
Today, we're spending the hour with Kevin Kruse, historian of 20th century American political and social history. He's professor of history at Princeton University and co editor of Myth America Historians Take on the Biggest Legends and Lies About Our Past. He also contributed to the 1619 Project. If you have any questions or comments, what are your thoughts about the administration's efforts to rewrite, whitewash, and erase history? What concerns you the most? If you work in any museums or in schools, how are you dealing with these threats and intimidation? And then we're also going to talk about some of the big news that's been happening, the Supreme Court decision on ICE in Los Angeles. We will also talk about a conference that happened just a couple days ago, the recent National Conservatism Conference. What strikes you about where we are right now in this political moment? You can give us a call at 866-798-8255. You can also email your call at kalw.org. Kevin, we had on Kathleen Duvall yesterday. She's a professor of history at the
Yeah.
University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And she's out with this amazing book, Native Nations. It's about
Mhm.
Native Americans in North America. And she starts in the year 1000, which is just so incredible to think about. We hardly ever talk about the year 1000 in this country. She said that her students absolutely love learning about history. They're hungry for it. And she said something has really shifted in the last 4 years where they just want to know more. What are you finding with your students at Princeton?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I think what we've seen is there's a real a hunger. There's a real desire to wrestle with the complicated facts. I think a lot of people outside the university have an idea that students maybe want something simple and straightforward. I find that they really are up to the challenge of wrestling with the messiness of American history, of getting an understanding of the nuances and the complexity, and realizing again that there are things they can learn from them. That when you wrestle with, say, the racial past of America, it's not as I think some people on the far right would say, oh, when you talk about slavery and segregation, you're trying to make white kids feel bad. I don't think that's the point. I think it's to try to understand this problem and to make them empathetic and to understand what was going on with these complex situations. And They appreciate that because too often they're fed a story that everything was nice and simple in the past. Right, everything was perfect, and this is what nostalgia is. It flattens out all the problems. It only brings out a kind of fuzzy, warm memories, and they take a little bit of comfort to know that uh, uh, things in the past were just as complicated as right now, in different ways. But people faced their own series of problems, and they came through them, and that gives them a little bit of hope that they can do it too. So I started off my lecture course. My lecture course starts in 1920. The years before that are years of chaos. You've got the Spanish flu epidemic. You've got World War One. You've got the Red Scare, Palmer raids, or race riots, massive labor strikes. It's just total chaos, right?
Hmm.
And when I lecture that, I can kind of see the students nodding along as different points resonate to them, right? They have seen racial protests in their own time. They saw a pandemic shut down their life. Like this all sounds familiar to them. Again, history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And so I
Hmm.
do think they take comfort in that fairy tale story they heard about the 1950s where everything was perfect, or the 1980s where everything was great. It's not true, right? There were problems there too, and people muddled through and figured them out. And hey, we can too.
Can you give us a sense of what your students are like and what they're talking about in this political moment? Because I went to school a while ago, but I don't remember the acceptance rates being so difficult. It's just incredible to think that if you want to get into Princeton, the acceptance rate is 4.5%. So for every 100 applicants, only 5 are admitted. What are your
Yeah.
students like?
My students are great. I mean, my students are curious and inquisitive. Princeton, even with that low uh, acceptance rate, has expanded its undergraduate enrollment in recent years. And I think importantly, made admissions need blind and gave financial awards as grants, not loans, which I think has made Princeton a much more attractive possibility for a wider range of students. That may be why the acceptance rate is low, is that more people are finally applying here. And the students come from a range of backgrounds, all sorts of politics from around the country and around the world.
Hmm.
I find some who are um, uh, deeply versed in American history, and some for whom this is the first thing they've ever learned about America, right? And so
Hmm.
it's a range of attitudes and a range of approaches, but a general curiosity and a willingness to engage is, I think, present across the board.
Have you seen diversity affected by the affirmative action Supreme Court case? Gosh, that was already June 2023, 2 years ago.
I haven't personally. I'm not involved in that here on campus in terms of the admissions process, and I don't have that data at hand. Anecdotally, I haven't seen a change, but it's the kind of thing where in just 2 years you just notice it in terms of the demographics of campus. If it's gotten a real change, I think we're going to see that over the coming decades.
Hmm. Well, today we're speaking with Kevin Kruse, professor of history at Princeton University, historian of 20th century American political and social history, co-editor of Myth America, Historians Take on the Biggest Legends and Lies About Our Past. And if you have any questions or comments for Kevin Kruse, you can give us a call at 866-798-8255. You can also email your call at kalw.org. Let's hear from Greg in Palo Alto. Hi, Greg. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you. Oh, gosh. I'll turn my radio down.
Thank you. Greg's turning his radio down.
Yeah, okay. So I remember listening to a program several years ago on a different public radio station where the commentary was about an author who had written a book called Lies My Teacher Told Me. And he went through the whole history of sort of the myths surrounding American history. I can tell you as somebody, well, I'm 82 and I grew up in the 50s and 60s, and I, even through my college education and even into graduate school, I don't remember ever the emphasis on the fact that George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and other the quote-unquote founders owned slaves. I didn't learn that until many years later. How indigenous people were just genocided in this country. And So there's just an incredible amount of mythology that goes on. I don't know what's going on in the schools today. I have no idea if the children in schools are getting a better education about the truth or not. I will say one thing, too. I heard a guy, I can't remember what state he was from. He was just interviewed. He's from the South. And he was making a claim again that, the South fought the Civil War for states' rights. So I went in and I did an Internet search for the secession document by the state of South Carolina, when they decided to secede from the Union. Right away in the first paragraph, they make multiple references to the fact that it was slavery, that they didn't like the way the North was treating the South with regard to this issue and interfering in slavery. So we've grown up, most people, just not learning the truth about what's going on in this country. I mean, there's so many other examples, but I mean, that's it's just amazing that kind of mythology has gone on for so many decades.
Well, thank you for the call, Greg. I wonder what your thoughts are on this, Kevin, because so much has changed. I mean, when you look at Indigenous issues, for example, we were talking with Kathleen Duvall yesterday about how at Standing Rock, a lot changed, where especially young Indigenous people said, we are so tired of other people telling our stories. And I'm blown away by the number of books and documentaries and TV shows that are coming out made by Indigenous people. So that shifted so much. And then the George Floyd uprising and people saying, we want a seat at the table. We're tired of not hearing our own voices among the African American and the Black community. So can you talk about that? Because things are shifting, and at the same time, the backlash is heavy.
Yeah, so here I can talk about two of our authors in the collection. Ari Kelman, who's a brilliant professor at the University of California, Davis, not far from you, wrote a piece for us on the myth of the vanishing Indian, right? And talking about kind of the popularity of narratives like "Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee" and things like that, which when they supported Native Americans, when they took a empathetic view of what Native Americans had suffered, still presented this image of Native Americans as being in the 19th century, right? As having died out and vanished and faded away, which obviously is not true. And so protests in Standing Rock, pop culture, things like the show Reservation Dogs, and there's been a real revival across the board here, real visibility. Not that Native Americans have ever gone away, but I think they've told their own stories and made their own stand, and have disproved that idea that they had vanished away. The George Floyd protest. We've got an essay in there by Glenda Gilmore, a former professor at Yale, the Steve N. Woodward professor of Yale. And what Glenda talks about in that essay is the dangerous myth that we have about the civil rights era, where they protested right? You constantly saw during the 2020 Black Lives Matter protests after George Floyd that these protesters weren't doing it the right way. They should do it like Martin Luther King did. Well, they did it like Martin Luther King did. As she showed, their tactics were largely the same. Their statements were largely the same. The protests were largely the same. And guess what? When Martin Luther King Jr. led those protests in the 1960s, he too was deeply unpopular. By the time of his assassination, he was polling at about 35% approval rating in this country, right? And he's since been retrofitted as somebody all Americans agree with, all Americans loved at the time, which is simply not the case, right? So in both cases, understanding how we got to this moment helps us see the connections between civil rights struggles today and civil rights struggles in the past. And in some ways, the break between the visibility of Native Americans today and the invisibility of Native Americans in the past.
What about Greg's question? It definitely differs based on what part of the city you live in, but he would like to talk more about what children are learning today.
Well, he mentioned the kind of the lost cause theory, the idea that the Civil War wasn't about slavery. And by the way, bravo, good for you for doing exactly what I would have done, which is to go to the primary sources. And in the secession documents, you can see quite clearly that they didn't care about states' rights at all. In fact, they complained when northern states weren't abiding by the fugitive slave law, but they were quite clear about what they did care about was slavery. So well done. Go to the primary sources. But what we can see with the kind of the rewriting about the Civil War and the consequences it's had, right? And this is across the board. The lost cause story, the idea that this was a valiant war fought by good people on both sides and that it had nothing to do with race and everything to do with states' rights or economic issues or whatever other lies they wanted to tell. That was something that was widely established in the early 20th century. And parallel to that was the idea that because the Civil War wasn't that bad, Reconstruction, when the government tried to come down and elevate freed African Americans to full equality, that was the real mistake. Well, the problem is that that was a powerful lesson taught in Ivy League universities and across the country. The name the Dunning School was given to it after a historian at Columbia University. And the problem is that a lot of powerful people believe that. So when John F. Kennedy became president, he'd been taught at Harvard University this false story about the past. And as the civil rights struggle unfolded on his watch, he was drawing all the wrong kind of lessons from the first Reconstruction as he tried to navigate what was called the second Reconstruction, right? So it really is a dangerous thing. And here we've got to think about the way in which the lost cause was made manifest across our country. And this goes down to the issue of Confederate monuments, which also have been under fire in recent years. And again, as Karen Cox, one of our contributors, notes in a brilliant essay on the Confederate memorials, these were not created right after the Civil War. Mm-hmm. These were created during the immigration panic and the Klan heyday of the 1920s, right? That's when the bulk of these came about. And these were not meant as tributes to noble soldiers who'd done great things. They were meant to reinforce white supremacy, right? My challenge to any politician who wants to defend a Confederate statue is that you should have to go before an audience today and read the speech that they made at the dedication of that monument. You will not be able to finish. It will be thoroughly racist. It'll be disgusting. You'll be chased off the stage, and I think rightly so. Mm-hmm. And again, these monuments, we have to remember monuments are something that celebrate who we are, what our values are, right? And if you're putting up a monument to someone who is famous solely for leading men into battle in an act of treason to kill United States soldiers in defense of slavery, I don't think that's something that needs to be valued. There's a reason other countries don't have statues to their villains, right? We don't have statues of Benedict Arnold. Nazi Germany didn't leave behind statues that Germans still love today. It's just not done. And yet it was done here through a conscious effort. And so when we had this campaign of people taking down the statues, the cry was, oh no, you're removing history. Well, first and foremost, that's not how we teach history. We don't teach with statues. They're kind of heavy and you can't take them into the classroom. But we also we have to remember that the real alteration of history were the statues themselves, right? That was the true diversion from the past. And so tearing them down is just erasing a mistake.
And we should say there are a number of media articles last month about the Trump administration putting Confederate statues back up. The Intercept reports that one, a statue of Confederate General Albert Pike was torn down by protesters during the 2020 George Floyd uprisings. The other, the Confederate Memorial in Arlington National Cemetery, originally commissioned by the United Daughters of the Confederacy, was removed on the recommendation of an independent commission in 2022, and they are going to be restored. Today, we're speaking with Kevin Kruse, professor of history at Princeton University and co-editor of Myth America. Historians take on the biggest legends and lies about our past. After a break, we'll talk about the recent National Conservatism Conference. This is Your Call. We'll be back after this. This is Your Call. I'm Rose Aguilar. Tomorrow, we will talk about gun violence in this country and ask what happened to the conversation about gun control. We hope you can join us for that. If you have a show idea or a guest idea, you can email yourcall@kalw.org. If you'd like to join today's conversation with historian Kevin Kruse, we'd love to hear from you. You can give us a call at 866-798-8255. You can also email your call at kalw.org. Today, we are continuing our new series, The Authoritarian Playbook. Every Wednesday, we'll summarize the week's news, put it in context, and find out how people are responding. Kevin Kruse is professor of history at Princeton University and co-editor of Myth America. Historians take on the biggest legends and lies about our past. We have an email from Sandy who says, who are the people who are coordinating the whitewashing efforts to erase history? She writes, Donald is not smart enough. Is it Stephen Miller? Is it Russ Vought? Well, thank you for this, Sandy. This brings us to the National Conservatism Conference. So this happened just a couple of days ago in D.C., and I'm reading from their website. We see national conservatism as the best path forward for a democratic world confronted by a rising China abroad and a powerful new Marxism at home. Now, this speech by Republican Senator Eric Schmidt from Missouri is getting a lot of attention, and I wanted to play this clip. And Kevin, I'd love for you to put this in context and just let us know what you think this means about where we're going. So this talk was given on September 2nd, and it's called What is an American?
The Continental Army's soldiers dying of frostbite at Valley Forge. The Pilgrims struggling to survive in the hard winter soil of Plymouth. The pioneers striking out from Missouri for the wild and dangerous frontier. The outnumbered Kentucky settlers repelling wave after wave of Indian war band attacks from beyond the stockade walls. All of them will be astonished to hear that they were only fighting for a proposition. They believed they were fighting for a nation, a homeland for themselves and their descendants. They fought, they bled, they struggled, they died for us. They built this country for us. America, in all its glory, is their gift to us, handed down across the generations. It belongs to us. It's our birthright. It's our heritage, our destiny. If America is everything and everyone, then it is nothing and no one at all. But we know that's not true. America is not a universal nation. It is something distinctive, unique, and real, unlike any other place or people in the history of mankind.
So that's Missouri Senator Eric Schmidt speaking at the National Conservatism Conference in D.C. on September 2nd. He says we can no longer apologize for who we are. Kevin, what do you make of what Senator Schmidt said there?
I think it's deeply ignorant. I mean, it's ignorant of what America has been, what it's fashioned itself to be. It's ignorant of American history. And I'd say, personally, for Eric Schmidt, who imagines himself to be some kind of heir of the founding generation, Eric Schmidt is like me, of German extraction. We were hated by the founders. Benjamin Franklin warned about the swarthy hordes of Germans who were going to come here and Germanize Americans and destroy us and destroy them and take them down, right? The idea that once America was set in motion, that it should be closed off from other people would have kept people like my ancestors and Eric Schmidt's ancestors out of here. And this is something that we see throughout American history, is that one generation's vilified immigrants come in here, and some of them pull up the ladder behind them, right? So the Germans were vilified, and they hated the Irish. And the Irish became Americanized, and they hated the Italians. The Italians came in, and they hated the Greeks. And the Greeks came in, and they hated the Latinos. And the Latinos came in, and on and on. And so it's been this constant chain. There's often something odd in that there's nothing more American than this panic about the new wave of immigration by the recent wave of immigrants. And so at that level, I just would like to urge the senator to actually do some reading of the American history he professes to love so much, but seems to know so little about, and to actually read up on this. I think he might be quite surprised. And I hope a little bit ashamed of his statements about immigration that would have cut his own family off. The rejection of America as an idea is also, I think, deeply offensive. It's long been praised from liberal and conservative politicians alike that America was more than a mere nation, more than a kind of crude blood and soil vision of nationalism, that it just belonged to the people who were here and no one else. America's big selling point throughout its history has been that this is an idea and an ideal, and one that is so flexible, so superior, so, if not perfect, becoming more perfect every day, that it can welcome anyone, that it can transform anyone, that America is such a powerful concept, an idea, that it can transform anyone and make them into an American, no matter where they come from, no matter who they are, no matter what their race, no matter what their religion, no matter what their background, that they can come here and remake themselves, because America is a land of opportunity and a land of freedom as broadly written as possible, right? And that is much more than that kind of narrow plotting vision of America as one bound up and an inheritance only for a certain select few.
Yesterday, the Department of Homeland Security's official Twitter page wrote, "Remember who you are, comma, American. Remember who you are." And then they wrote, "Report foreign invaders." Given that, I wonder what your thoughts are about media coverage and historians, your colleagues, how people should be talking about the true history of this country in the lead up to the 250th birthday. Because you know that if Senator Schmidt is, comfortable making these statements, this is what we're going to hear nonstop in the next year.
Yeah, I think we've got to push back. I saw that DHS tweet myself. My reaction was, yeah, remember you're an American. And Americans used to think that this kind of talk was the kind of things we only saw by cartoonish Nazis in 1960s war movies, right? And yet the Department of Homeland Security has embraced this. Again, it's a narrow, small vision of America. And for all their claims that this is somehow making America great, that it's somehow making America more respected in the world, that it's somehow making Americans safer and richer and happier, the evidence is all against that. And so, like all of these kind of narrow nationalist drives, there's a danger in the authoritarianism, but there's also a fundamental weakness. It's a brittle prospect, and so they do whatever they can to try to cow people into silence, try to convince them there's no point in resisting, try to shut down all opposition when that is needed more than ever. Remember, you're an American. Remember I like to quote the words of Senator Carl Schmitt, who, when someone challenged him with my country right or wrong, said, yeah, my country right or wrong. When right, to be kept right. When wrong, to be set right. And that, I think, is an attitude that all Americans should be able to get behind. That this country is not perfect. This country is not clothed. This country is not finished. That it constantly has room for growth and change, and being adaptable and welcoming is a huge part of that.
Today, we're spending the hour with historian Kevin Kruse. He's professor of history at Princeton University, co-editor of Myth America. Let's go next to Maurice in Oakland. Hi, Maurice. Welcome to the show.
Oh, greetings, Rose, and to your guests. Just a couple of quick points. One should remember that USA has and still stands for the United States of amnesia, one of the least educated people on the planet. Secondly, I'd like to quote Karl Marx, not one of my favorite people, who once said that history repeats itself first as tragedy and then as farce. Well, everything up to this point, as far as I'm concerned, is tragedy, and what we're living through is farce. And lastly, the historian Richard Hofstadter, who used to say that America thought it was born perfectly and could only get better, which coincides with what the professor from Princeton said. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Maurice. What are your thoughts on Maurice's comments, Kevin?
Well, I agree that I said some smart things, so I'll start there. I think that he's absolutely right. I mean, I think that we do have a kind of an amnesia in this country, and it's gotten much worse over time, and not just because Americans are forgetful, but because there's been a conscious effort to cloud their vision. There's been a campaign and it's largely come from the right of right-wing media to rewrite American history, even as they're claiming that it's the left that's rewriting it. There's a real unwillingness to grapple with some of the important parts of the past, and that's what I think the Trump administration is really trying to do, is to paper over all problems in the past and therefore seal off any usefulness they might have for the present.
Well, thank you for the call, Maurice. I also wanted to play a clip from Russ Voigt, because he's the guy who's smashing the administrative state through the Office of Management and Budget. And he also spoke at the National Conservatism Conference in D.C. And I wonder, based on what he said, I wonder where you think we are going, given what Russ Voigt says. So he says he's finally able to talk about why it's important to upend critical race theory and openly talk about his faith. He said even 3 or 4 years ago, he was called a homophobe and a racist, and he's not anymore. And he said it's all thanks to Donald Trump and being tough. He says that they're moving in the opposite direction of a woke and weaponized bureaucracy. And he ended his speech by saying, this is about a movement. It is not about one man. Here's clip 2.
Think that we have won the intellectual war. Don't think that the minute that the president is out of office and this town doesn't have to deal with the immense the immense power of his personality, his ideas, his connection to the American people, his voters, that this town, and not just the K Street crowd, but the think tank community that exists here, will not try to pivot back to the form of conservatism that I believe that national conservatism is a response to the caricatures of that movement. There will be a conversation, and it will be an aggressive conversation. And so while we need, at this moment in time, all of the enthusiasm for the work being done in the administration to support us, to give us ideas, to help us make the case for it, because we're largely giving people a wider angle lens of what this country used to be about, what its leaders used to care about. While we do that, also be building the institutions of the movement. We need more think tanks. We need more journals. We need more opinion columnists that are going to be doing the work of national conservatism to ensure that this is a durable event, and that the movement that President Trump has been a part of, that the national conservative movement has been a part of, isn't just a unhealthy stream built around the personality of one person and their ability to win elections, but it is in fact a durable intellectual river that becomes a flood that cuts through the work of saving this country.
So that's Russ Vogt, the man who is smashing the administrative state, cutting budgets through the Office of Management and Budget. I play this clip. This really struck me, Kevin, because a lot of people are wondering, what happens after Trump? Is this all about one man? And he's clearly saying it is not about Trump. It is about a movement.
Well, I think he's trying to wish something into existence, right? I mean, there are all those things supporting Trump right now. He's got all these allies, but they've got the wind at their back because he's in office. And I think there's no guarantee that if something should happen to President Trump and Vice President Vance were to step in, or if Vance were to be elected after him, however, that he would continue this. I mean, we've seen Vance himself is incredibly mercurial, has spun like a weather vane on Trump, went from calling him America's Hitler to backing him fully. And if he gets that seat on his own, what would he do? I don't think anyone can really say that right now. I don't think anyone in the Republican Party has the ability currently to hold together the constituencies that have rallied around Donald Trump. I don't think anyone can really replicate what he's done. He's got a kind of magical hold on the kind of MAGA followers out there, and I don't know if they're going to rally around somebody like Vance or even somebody like Schmidt. So I think what you're hearing from Vaught there is he's right. They should be trying to broaden the view and make the base of this much bigger than one person. But I think the fact that he's saying this at that conference speaks volumes about just how aware he is of just how fragile this all is. And at the same time, I think he's maybe starting to realize that the destruction of the administrative state, as you put it, is going to come with certain cost. And ultimately, this party, like any party, Democrats, Republicans, Whigs, whatever, will be judged on how they perform when their leaders are in office, right? And the wrecking ball that Vaught and his cronies have taken to the federal government in the short term, they're bragging about because they've cut jobs and they've slashed programs and they've pruned away regulations and they've saved money maybe. But in the long term, I think they might see a real regret on the part of the country there. The cost of the tariffs is starting to come due. You're going to see that blow back in the economy. What RFK Jr. is doing at Health and Human Services, in the expert opinion of medical officials and doctors, is likely going to bring about a horrific pandemic. We've seen FEMA and natural disaster response slashed. Do we have another Katrina? On and on. And so I am an historian. My training is in hindsight. I try not to make predictions about the future, but I do feel safe in saying that something is coming down the pike that I don't think is going to be to the liking of Vaught and others in the administration. And that's what they're going to be judged on. And whether or not Trump is around, whether or not there are supporting people able to, promote national conservatism or whatever they're calling it, that is going to be ultimately what they're judged on by the record, by what they actually do. And that, I think, is what's going to ultimately be the final word on them.
Well, and also in our remaining 30 seconds, Kevin, there are so many protests happening. The Washington Post has a piece today about students at 4 D.C. universities protesting Trump's police takeover. People are wondering what is happening on the streets, but you have to sometimes look at it and then connect the dots, because there's a lot going on in Chicago. There's a lot going on in L.A., for example. Lots of things happening on the streets.
And those street protests, I'll say in closing, are I think an important thing for people to do, right? I mean, again, remember you are an American, and that's a right you still currently have. And I think we all should exercise it if there are issues for which, no matter what your politics are, if there are issues that you believe in, get out, be involved. That's what this country has always been. People from across the political spectrum speaking out. And I think it cuts against the authoritarian drive of this government, which is that it wants to make people feel alone and isolated and confused. There is, I think, a great solace and a solidarity in being out on the streets in numbers.
Kevin Kruse is professor of history at Princeton University and co-editor of Myth America, Historians Take on the Biggest Legends and Lies About Our Past. He also contributed to the 1619 Project. Kevin, thank you so much for your work, and thank you for joining us.
My pleasure to be here. Thanks.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us. I'm Rose Aguilar. It's your call.